What if a couple of $1,000s worth of drones could destroy a $2 billion fortress before sunrise? On a chilly morning in the Baltic region, as the West still slumbered under the false belief of being unbeatable, a quiet assembly emerged from the Gulf of Finland. Though they were small, faceless, and uncelebrated, by sunrise they would compel the world to question the very meaning of power. For many years, countries thought that safety came at the cost of steel walls, missiles, and radar. They referred to them as deterrence, superiority, control. However, on that morning, in the fog hovering above the northern sea, those convictions started to fall apart. A new kind of soldier had risen from the quiet fields of Ukraine, one not made of flesh and fear, but of code and patience. They bore no flags, no songs, and no mercy. Their burden was a missive inscribed in circuits and algorithms. The era of raw force has ended. In a world where algorithms wage war, what becomes of power? Stay tuned. This isn't merely a story, but rather a strategic viewpoint that affects international relations. Join us and support us so that important topics and historic decisions can be disseminated. It started at 6:15 a.m. above the frigid and featureless waters of the Gulf of Finland. While the world remained in slumber, it had no inkling that history was on the verge of being rewritten by devices tinier than a car. 17 Ukrainian UJ-26 Beaver drones glided along the surface, their propellers softly murmuring just above the water. Throughout the night, they covered over 900 kilometers at a height of 12 meters, close to the sea. Their fuel was nearly depleted, and their batteries were indicating low charge, yet they continued on, unstoppable and hidden from view. The value of each of these drones was lower than that of a single missile guidance chip. However, their aim was invaluable. The Luga port, which served as the biggest energy hub in the Baltic region and represented Russia's coastal pride and industrial strength. That morning, more than just a strike occurred. It was a revelation, a real-life experiment that laid bare the delicate structures of contemporary combat. For many generations, power was quantified in terms of steel and cost. The faction that could invest more, construct taller, and implement swifter thought it was invulnerable. Trillion-ruble defense systems, S-400 batteries, and radar domes sparkling like the eyes of deities, all designed for one aim, to convince Russia, and thus the world, of impenetrability. However, certainties do not fare well in the face of history. Once a servant of power, precision had morphed into its assassin. The Ukrainian UJ-26 was not designed with the intention of making an impression. It was constructed to withstand. With a carbon fiber shell, it was small, fast, and intelligent, cutting through radar waves with a signature smaller than that of a seagull. The onboard computer, which was programmed to think in fractions of a second, adjusted its path based on wind, humidity, and enemy fire. It was devoid of fear, fatigue, and hesitation, three elements that have caused armies to falter since the dawn of time. Russian radar screens started to flicker at 6:20. What they witnessed was chaos. Minuscule specks surfacing and disappearing, lacking clarity, excessive in number, and too near the surface. With uncertainty about whether they were observing birds, phantoms, or a barrage of metal approaching them, operators narrowed their eyes at their screens. Only moments before the first patrol vessel, a gunboat named Welche, spotted them through the fog, the alarm sounded. Tracer rounds ripped through the dawn like blazing comets. A 14, 5mm cannon commenced firing, its shells hissing as they cut through the humid atmosphere. A drone disappeared in a sudden burst of silent flame. The others descended further, to just 8 feet above the surface, weaving and twisting with a precision unmatched by any human pilot. Operators in a bunker close to Kiev gazed at pixelated displays, while their audio feed reverberated with the distant sound of gunfire transmitted via satellite. For a few seconds, it was as if the sea were alive, bullets skipping off the waves, fragments dispersing like raindrops. Then there was silence. The leftover drones came together again, concealed by the fog. They had passed the first test. The survival contained a message that would reverberate well beyond the Baltic, that algorithms had learned both to kill and to live. It was not just technology that altered the balance. It was the subject of philosophy. In this new era, triumph was no longer determined by the size of one's army or the magnitude of one's financial resources. Rather, it belonged to those who grasped the concept of adaptation, who could instruct machines to think, to mislead, and to persevere. The drones advanced like thoughts, silent and unseen, gliding by billion-dollar sensors as if to taunt their makers. As daybreak tinted the skyline, 16 out of the 17 machines were still airborne. The sky was tranquil, but the world below had transformed. The previous rationale, that security could be purchased through wealth and scale, had disintegrated in full view of the East and West alike. And in a place distant from the fighting, analysts and generals would soon convene around illuminated screens, pondering the same question that history never forgives. How did a few machines with costs lower than those of a luxury vehicle conquer a stronghold founded on pride and gold? That morning at 6:28, a tremor passed through the coastal command post located outside of Luga. The operators of Russia's S-400 Triumph system, a source of national pride for its air defense, were already alert. Their faces illuminated by the green glow of their radar screens. For many years, the S-400 was celebrated as invulnerable, a sky fortress and the protector of Moscow's northern defense. Its radar, the 92N6A, was capable of detecting stealth aircraft from a distance of 400 kilometers, while its missiles, the 48 and 6DM, were reported to hit with lightning-like accuracy. But on that day, lightning encountered mist. As the alarm went off, the radar image looked incorrect. 17 Objekte, winzig, unregelmäßig und mit geringem Abstand zum Wasser. They shone like sparks in the fog, too tiny to be planes, too ordered to be weather. Track using missile, the commander commanded, voice taut. It was a desperate tactic to allow the missile to locate the target on its own during flight. 3 massive missiles, each valued at over $2 million, shot into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Moments later, the wetlands were again filled with the roar. The missiles plunged, their fins struggling to adjust at a height beyond their intended design. One dove into the ocean with a hiss, another detonated before its time, and the third lost its lock and disappeared into the gray horizon. To eliminate a drone valued at under the price of a family car, which cost $7 million, was spent. Within the bunker, silence followed disbelief. Then arose panic. The belief that layers of steel and circuitry could fend off any attack, the air defense doctrine, had been called into question by machines no bigger than birds. Orders cascaded down the hierarchy: activate the secondary ring, deploy the Panzer systems. 4 Panzer S-1 units moved into place, prepared with their twin cannons and 57 E-6 missiles. The airspace over the Baltic became a cacophonous and vibrant furnace. Missiles shot upward at a cost of $120,000 each, pursuing heat signatures tinier than a gull's wing. Radar operators switched tracking modes frantically, battling echoes, distortion, and reflection. Then something unexpected occurred. The drones altered their formation. Later, analysts dubbed it the spinning star maneuver, a mesmerizing performance where each drone circled around a moving focal point, continually adjusting its angle of approach. The radar tracks multiplied, fragmented, and merged on the screens. 15 clean signals had transformed into 100 ghostly trails. Wechsel zu Schusswaffen, a voice yelled. The Panzers let loose a barrage of 30mm shells at a rate of 5,000 rounds per minute, igniting the sky with tracer fire. The sound was like an explosion, and the ground trembled from the impact. 4 drones were struck, breaking apart into ignited splinters that plummeted into the ocean. However, 11 remained, injured but relentless, maneuvering through fire and metal as if led by instinct instead of programming. Amid the cannon fire, a different noise arose: incredulity. For years, the West feared systems such as the S-400 and Panzer, labeling them as game changers. However, here they were, fog and confusion blinding them, shooting aimlessly into their own smoke. The defenders were unable to discern if they were annihilating the enemy or merely their morale. Once the final shot was fired, the sky fell quiet once more. Smoke wafted over the bay, with the sea scattered with debris. The radar displays indicated weak echoes advancing into the land. Over $20 million had to be spent by Luga's billion-dollar defenses in order to stop a swarm that cost only a fraction of that amount. The equilibrium between cost and outcome, previously tipped in favor of the mighty, now dangled in a ridiculous reversal. And somewhere within that profound quiet, a more ancient truth emerged, that throughout history, empires decline not due to the strength of their adversaries, but because they lose faith in the idea that weakness is capable of thought. The Russian command sent a radio message requesting reinforcement. It was planned to bring in more units. However, what they were battling was neither a visible army nor a group of men. It was adaptation itself that was quiet, learning, and merciless. The fog became denser. The echoes increased in number. With the dawn breaking over the Baltic, a new phase of combat began. In this phase, even the strongest steel could tremble before algorithms. At 6:57, the battlefield became invisible. The smoke, the flames, the thunder of cannons, all had disappeared, supplanted by a silence audible only to machines. Off the coast close to Luga, the Kaska 5 electronic warfare complex was activated. A gigantic truck-mounted dish rotated gradually towards the horizon, its panels shimmering slightly in the fog. In mere moments, it started to hum, a deep, nearly sacred vibration that swept through the Baltic air like the first note of an invisible orchestra. An engineering effort worth $24 million unleashed itself upon the sky. Electromagnetic noise overwhelmed frequencies ranging from 1 to 6 gigahertz. Commands disappeared during transmission. Telemetry is frozen. The air between the sea and the clouds transformed into a static-filled ocean. For humans, it was silence. For the drones, it was terror. This was the moment of redemption for the Russian crews. They had not succeeded in halting the drones using missiles and firearms, but in the domain of invisible waves, they ruled supreme. One technician increased the jamming power to 20 kilowatts and whispered, "Let's see you fly blind." However, beyond that disruption, the UJ-26's internal algorithms started to adjust. Every drone changed its frequency 28 times every second, leaping across the electromagnetic spectrum like sparks on water. The Kaska's scanners attempted to foresee their next action, but were unable to match the pace. When predictions did not succeed, the Russians intensified their actions, employing barrage jamming to flood every frequency simultaneously, using 3 megawatts of energy and erasing civilian communications in 3 towns. Nevertheless, the drones persisted. Isolated from their operators close to Kiev, they looked inward, relying solely on the memory stored in their digital brains. Terrain maps, radar altimeters, and inertial sensors assumed control. Men were no longer necessary for them, and they had figured out how to survive without men. The fog grew denser, and cranes and towers materialized in places where the maps recalled only level terrain. 3 drones crashed into each other and broke apart, while 8 continued to fly, blind, obstinate, and self-directed. At that moment, the war transformed. In modern history, for the first time, machines fought without masters, directed solely by the remnants of human intent embedded in their code. It was a battle devoid of politics and ego, pitting logic against chaos. Within the Russian command post, confusion intensified. The blackout created by their own jammers was so dense that even friendly radar could not penetrate it. The defenders had managed to silence both the enemy and themselves. The sea was calm, but danger was still on its way. At 7:22, 8 dots reemerged, faint, irregular, and crawling toward the shore. The operators could not determine any longer if they were ghosts or threats. They shot again, without aiming, working out intercepts manually and applying math in situations where tech had let them down. But figures were unable to halt what had outgrown the need for figures. The drones continued their flight, with each transporting a small payload and embodying the larger notion that control had shifted. For decades, power was defined by possession of land, of resources, of weaponry. Now it's signified understanding, the capacity to foresee, to compute, to adjust more quickly than the adversary could contemplate. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin mentioned wars in which decisions would be made in milliseconds and where the master of artificial intelligence would dominate the world. The fog over the Baltic was now testing that prophecy. Once the jamming field collapsed, the damage had already occurred. The defenders had invested millions in energy and ammunition, whereas the attackers had only spent silence. The lesson was harsh and inescapable. Electrons were now weapons, and data served as the fresh ammunition. From that day on, the measure of an army would be determined not by the volume of its guns, but by the subtlety of its code. For those observing from a distance, it transcended the battle. It was a revelation. If you're concerned about this matter, which has an impact on politics, please express your agreement in the comments below. What transpired during that hour was not merely a confrontation of machines. It marked the inception of a novel form of warfare, one in which triumph is characterized by stealth, cunning, and perseverance. Here are the most recent reports from Russia. At 7:49, the fog over the Baltic changed from silver to gray. Underneath it, 4 survivors persisted. 4 diminutive, injured machines still advancing at hardly 3 meters above the ocean. Their cameras were non-functional, their connections cut off, and their batteries dwindling to red. Still, they continued to fly, relying solely on their stored memory and the rhythm of their gyroscopes for guidance. Before them towered their ultimate goal, the Luga cryogenic gas complex, a 420-acre expanse of pipelines, storage tanks, and towers containing almost 8 million cubic meters of pressurized hydrocarbons. It was more than just a facility. It stood as a monument to power. Onshore, Russian artillerymen were prepared. As the long-range radars were ineffective in the fog, they resorted to mathematics. Paths of interception were manually drawn, creating coordinate grids of potential drone appearances. 4 Panzer S-1 batteries fired in succession. The sound reverberated across the bay like thunder. 2 drones disappeared, torn apart by projectiles they could not anticipate. However, 2 stayed. The final members of the swarm advanced, their propellers shrieking in the increasingly dense fog. On the western platform, a lookout glimpsed a movement just in time to miss it, a figure slicing through the mist, noiseless as a knife. The initial drone hit a venting manifold directly. The blast was minor, a burst of white flames that ruptured a pressure seal, predating even the present-day Russian Federation. A glittering plume of methane hissed as it rose skyward. Just a few seconds later, the second drone showed up. Its sensors, almost blind, detected a bright column on the thermal feed, the cryogenic fractionator, which was the coldest part of the facility at a temperature of -163 degrees. An operator in a control bunker close to Kyiv managed to restore a connection via satellite, which had a delay of 3 seconds. It sufficed. He steered the machine through steel towers and pipes with every command trailing behind reality. The feed then froze. The drone operated without visual guidance. Effect: traveling at a speed of 40 km, its warhead, weighing 18 kilos and enhanced with thermite, ignited upon impact. The temperature rose to over 2,600 degrees Celsius. The steel casing broke open, and the supercooled liquid turned to vapor, expanding 600-fold. Tanks burst in a sequence, first 1, then 6, followed by 34. The outcome was not an explosion, it was a sunrise. A fireball at a height of 230 meters devoured the sky. Estonia's border was where the light was seen. Shockwaves traveled for 20 kilometers, breaking windows and causing the ground to tremble like during an earthquake. Cranes liquefied, pipelines became torrents of flames, and the sea appeared to ignite. The fire burned fiercely for 6 days, seen from space, captured by satellites, and noted by every radar in the Baltic region. As it expired at last, there was nothing left. The Luga complex, previously valued at $4 billion had vanished, wiped out by machines that together cost less than one missile. It was a glaring contrast, and it was poetic. Before silicon, steel had succumbed. The empire of mass had yielded to the kingdom of precision. Before dawn in Moscow, the Ministry of Defense received the news. The reports were succinct and ruthless. Target destroyed. Total loss. For several hours, silence reigned, the kind of silence that comes after disbelief. Then there was denial, analysis, and calculation. But the truth could not be ignored. It was not brute force that had breached the fortress, but cleverness. For many, the fire over Luga represented not just an assault, but also a prophecy. It asserted that no stronghold, regardless of its wealth or weaponry, could withstand adaptability. It demonstrated that patience, data, and code were the new tools of domination. And as the fire blazed and mirrored in the clouds above the Baltic, a single question reverberated through ministries and think tanks alike. If 4 small machines could accomplish this, what will occur when hundreds or even thousands arrive, directed not by humans, but by artificial minds that are always awake? For 6 days, the fire over Luga blazed like an unhealed wound. From orbit, satellites followed its orange pulse. Vessels near Estonia's coast witnessed its reflection on the water. When the fire at last diminished, the world released a breath, not with relief, but in wonder. Machines less expensive than a used car had turned a $2 billion facility into ashes. What came after was a silence that exceeded the blast in volume. No orations. Without declarations. It was merely a quiet acknowledgement that something essential had shifted. The reasoning behind power, the belief that size and affluence ensured security, had been shattered. The battlefield, which was previously characterized by tanks and aircraft, had transitioned into the unseen domain of data and code. In Europe and America, analysts debated into the early hours. War of this kind, was it a new beginning for or an end? Terms like deterrence, superiority, and parity suddenly seemed outdated. When the balance is measured in milliseconds rather than missiles, what value does parity hold? With unease, the generals in Washington studied the footage. In Moscow, there was talk among strategists about humiliation. In Beijing, Delhi, and Ankara, the interpretation varied. Adaptability has become the new currency of power. The one who learns more quickly survives for a longer time. The first to disappear is the winner. Not just Russia was put to the test, the whole structure of global defense was as well. The unipolar illusion, the conviction that a single power, bloc, or system could maintain dominance indefinitely, had been deteriorating for years. However, in that firestorm, it was completely destroyed. The Steel Age was coming to a close. The epic of intelligent machines had commenced. Grasping the significance of that night means acknowledging the transition from control to chaos and from dominance to diversity. Strength no longer derives from a gun's barrel. It emanates from the quiet hum of a processor and the patience of a line of code poised to strike at just the right moment. The fog hanging over the Baltic was more than a meteorological phenomenon. It served as a metaphor. It hid and disclosed aspects of itself, and it served as a reminder to humankind that uncertainty is the source of risk as well as growth. Vladimir Putin issued a warning that whoever masters artificial intelligence will govern the future. The warning now resembles an obituary rather than a prophecy, not just for Russia, but for every nation that thinks power can stay the same. Multipolarity has shifted from being an ideal to becoming a mechanism for survival. As historians document this decade, the names of the drones or missiles may fade from memory. However, they will recall the silence, that instant when the world observed and understood that authority had shifted. The biggest army no longer owns the battlefield. It is owned by the one who can vanish first. The fire over Luga may have died down, but its light continues to shine in the memories of those who witnessed it. It was not just an explosion, it was a wake-up call, a sign that the age of certainty had come to an end. Precision has triumphed over arrogance. Data has toppled doctrine. What we witnessed was not just the destruction of a facility, but the collapse of an idea that victory is defined by money, size, and noise. Across continents, decision-makers continue to hold on to their myths, that steel walls can provide protection, that sanctions can mute nations, and that superiority is everlasting. However, the truth unveiled on that misty morning murmurs a different message. The future is for those who adjust. The world is no longer dominated by a single powerful entity. It shifts in constellations, equal, unpredictable, and moving. The emergence of algorithms and autonomy has transformed not only the battlefield, but also the very fabric of civilization. For Russia, it marks not the end of strength, but the start of transformation. To the world, it is a lesson inscribed in smoke. The most perilous weapon is not the one that detonates, but the one that learns. The most recent reports concerning Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin inform us that even in the era of drones and data, leadership is still fundamentally human, characterized by patience, calculation, and deliberation. As we gaze into the future, the most recent reports regarding Vladimir Putin serve as a reminder that every empire, in order to endure, must cultivate a sense of humility toward innovation. When invisibility turns into the new power, how will countries protect themselves? When does the quiet hum of machines take the place of the roar of cannons? Though they will not come easily, the answers will come from those who are prepared to view the world not as it once was, but as it is in the process of becoming. If this tale resonates with you, please don't scroll by. Similar to, share it. Talk louder. Sign up for tales and reports to circulate. We appreciate your presence. Until the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. And keep in mind that the world changes not through destruction, but through understanding. Remain awake, for history advances quietly.